So with the announcement of AMD's Zen 3 Ryzen 5000 series, also came something pretty significant, and that's going to be higher prices across the board. Is AMD still going to be the performance to value king, or are they doing what Intel did years ago? Let's discuss why this is important, all the way from the budget builds to the high-end builds. Let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell, smash that thumbs up button for the YouTube algorithm, makes me happy. Let's get right into it. So if you guys saw, AMD announced Zen 3, their Ryzen 5000 series. Basically the four main CPUs are the 56, 58, 59, and 5950X CPUs. Basically the same core count as we had last generation from 6, 8, 12, and 16. One big difference is that all of these CPUs across the board are now around $50 more expensive in terms of the MSRP. So let's discuss a few very important points as to why this may be justifiable and why it may be important. First, let's start with the 5600X. This is going to be quote unquote the budget, even though at $299 it's really not a budget CPU. The 6-core 12-thread processor. Now we all know that the 3000 series Ryzen had the 3600 and the 3600X, which were basically absolutely legendary when they were released, primarily because their price to performance ratio was absolutely crazy. I mean, I've seen a 3600 for as low as like $160 for sale, and as we know, that's a CPU that's really encroaching on performance, almost similar to Intel's 8700K, which was basically the gaming king when that came out. So to have a CPU that's $160 and performs fantastically well for gaming, a lot of people were very, very happy. And now we get to the 5600X, and that X is actually pretty important. If we look at the 3600X, it was priced above the 3600, but very few people actually recommended you spend that extra amount to get the X because it doesn't really make up that big of a difference. In fact, you can overclock the 3600 to very similar performance. Technically, it is a better bin chip. That's why they have these X variants. But in the real world, it's better to save that money and get the 3600 as most people would do, especially since this is a CPU that's considered a little bit more budget friendly. So now we get to the 5600X at $299, and that's certainly a significant difference. $50 at this range is a lot more important than, let's say, the 5950X. If you go from $750 to $800, most people buying that CPU, yeah, they may think, okay, it's a little more expensive, but it's not really going to affect their build as much just because it's a much more expensive CPU. But if you're on the lower end and you thought you would get a 3600 for $160, now the 5600X is almost twice that price at $300. That's going to make a little bit more of an impact in terms of your budget-friendly build, and you certainly may either have to up your budget or wait until AMD releases the regular 5600, which I'm assuming they will. There hasn't really been any information about this. Basically, without the X, I can only imagine it may be something like $50 cheaper, which is still going to be more expensive than the previous generation 3600, but at least it falls a little bit better into certain budget-friendly builds. So definitely, I would say around the more budget level, this is what I would term a little bit more of a significant increase. I mean, $300, it's no longer a budget CPU. We're really sort of in like that mid-tier performance CPU, pretty close at $400. Those are sort of the higher performing CPUs. So it's certainly a very interesting number, and it shows that AMD is really confident in their position in the market, especially against Intel. And now sort of the battle for these more budget level CPUs are going to be very interesting between AMD and Intel. Previously, AMD hands down would win the price to performance ratio, but now that the 5600X is around $300, Intel certainly has a chance to compete a little bit more with AMD with some of these like 10th generation SKUs or the 11th generation that's coming out. If they can price something that beats the 5600X for well under $300, they can certainly heat up that battle, and you'll see AMD respond as well. And of course, at this point, AMD feel that they have proven that their chips perform as well or better than Intel, so they kind of justify it by bumping up the price a little bit. Now, as we get into the other CPUs, something like the 5900X, which is going to be basically their best gaming CPU, let's say that's going to be competing against Intel's 10900K. Now, this CPU is going to be at around $549. Now, at this level, like I said before, it makes more of a difference on on the lower tiered CPU levels for people's budgets. This level, of course, it still impacts it. People still shop around between $50 to $100 difference if they're looking at Intel or looking at AMD. But if Intel calls the 5900X sort of the gaming king, they can justify this higher price. I mean, you can get a 3900X for around $399 now. So this is a $150 difference. But of course, the 3900X will not perform anywhere near as good as the 5900X in terms of gaming performance. Still 12 cores, but now we have lower latency, better IPC, much higher clock speeds. So everything you need not to bottleneck your new GPU, not to have any issues, and for a very fast gaming CPU. So I think AMD is also confident that they also have the trust of the consumer, of the enthusiast, of the gamer around this level, that they can sort of price maybe even a little bit above Intel and still be able to win that market. Of course, the 5950X is sort of on its own because at 16 core, 32 thread, Intel doesn't really have much competition for it. That's certainly a very beefy CPU, not even the 18 core 10980XE, which even the 3950X came up very close to it. I'm only assuming from benchmarks that the 5950X will either match that or completely blow it out of the water. So I'm waiting to see those benchmarks, but we can assume that it's going to perform very well, not only for gaming, it goes up to 4.9 gigahertz, but also for multi-threaded content creation, which is one of the strengths of these AMD CPUs. So is AMD justified at raising their prices? It's obvious they feel a lot more comfortable now, a lot more sort of entrenched in the market. That basically means that they're no longer the cheaper, budget-friendly competing option. It means that they pretty much know that they're number one in the space, not only with the multi-threaded performance like they were with the 3000 series CPUs, but now, as they titled their 5900X, it's the gaming king. It means that Intel is basically in second place, and AMD being the premium choice now, they can charge a little bit extra, even if it's $50 more. They can charge a premium price, reflecting their standing in the market. Now, this is very interesting because it's atypical of AMD's behavior, just because they've always been sort of in second place and fighting to get up to the top like they do against Nvidia and like they've done against Intel. But now that they've pretty much declared that they've beaten Intel, they can sort of really set whatever price they want. Now it's going to be up to Intel to either sort of slash their prices or put out better performing chips that are going to sort of underprice the Ryzen CPUs. But the most important thing here, Intel has to gain back sort of the hearts and minds of enthusiasts and gamers, because people really got a little bit mad at Intel over the last few years just because they really didn't innovate too much. They were just giving you the same CPU for the same price year after year with very minor bumps in performance, and that's why AMD came, pretty much cleaned Intel's clock. Very high performing CPUs now, even for gaming. So Intel has their work cut out for them. They're going to have to slash prices and up their performance considerably more over Zen 3, which with their 11th generation, which supposedly is still on the 14 nanometer process, it certainly will be interesting to see if Intel will even be capable of doing that this generation. Even AMD actually took a couple of generations to actually reach and surpass Intel. So if Intel had a fighting chance at doing that, it's certainly going to take another couple of years of them putting out just fantastic products. But certainly I think it's going to be difficult. That's why AMD has priced these CPUs higher. And of course, when the non-X variants are released, we can expect them to, of course, be a little bit less price. A lot of people can choose those. So it's not the end of the world. It's not like these are completely out of people's budgets. It's just that AMD's game has changed a little bit. They're no longer sort of just a budget-friendly option. Now they're also the premium, best performing option on the market. And that has a lot of ramifications depending on the level build that you're doing. So certainly something to keep in mind as you plan your builds. Take a look at these price differences. And of course, just wait for more CPUs to be announced without the X variant. That's going to help you save some as well. But for now, that's pretty much where we are on the market. And at least hopefully that's going to point to more competition. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys on the next one.